Before we jump into today's video, I wanted to discuss my new partnership with Player One Coffee. If you guys like knocking back plenty of cups of tasty roast while you're on those late night grinds, make sure to check out the link for 5% off your first order. And for today's video in particular, we are taking an in-depth look at Zane and his skill tree in Borderlands 3. And Zane in particular is pretty unique in that he is the first Vault Hunter where we are given access to two separate action skills that we can use at any given time if we decide to sacrifice our grenade slot. So we're going to be going in depth into each tree like before, but just to go through them quickly, we have Sentinel, which is going to allow you to call out a little Sentinel, which you can call to attack targets, kind of similar to Bloodwing with Mordecai. We have Digiclone, which will summon a digital clone, which you can use to distract enemies and switch place with. And then we have Barrier, where you'll pull up a barrier and you can use this to block and avoid damage. So starting with the Sentinel tree, you'll see Sentinel has a duration of 24 seconds with a cooldown at 36. Not too bad. It keeps it out for quite a bit of the fight. And our first passive ability here, Cold Bore, which is going to increase our weapon swap speed. And more interestingly, the shot fired after we swap our weapons deals a bonus amount of cryo damage, going up to 30% when fully leveled up. Moving on from that, we have some passives that are going to look at our speed in particular. Violent Momentum being the first one, where we gain more gun damage based on how fast we're moving. This also goes up to 30% with 5 points. And we have obvious synergy going on between Violent Momentum and our left skill, Violent Speed. A kill skill where after killing an enemy, we gain increased movement speed for a few seconds, stacking all the way on up to 20%. So obvious synergy between these two abilities, very much a run and gun oriented build we can kind of already see in the works between the bonus and Violent Momentum and then of course the bonus and Violent Speed. Moving down the tree though, Drone Delivery, Sentry will occasionally drop a free grenade based on your current grenade mod while attacking enemies. And this is really interesting because while we're sacrificing our grenade to have two skills, we're effectively still taking advantage of grenade mods through abilities like this. Moving into Salvation, another interesting kill skill here. After killing an enemy, our weapons gain lifesteal for a few seconds, stacking up to 20% of the damage being dealt, which is a really, really nice early survivability sustain style ability. Cool Hand, we gain increased reload speed, and a kill skill where our reload speed is increased even further after we've killed an enemy. And you're already kind of seeing a theme here with kill skills, and we're going to see this amplified even further when we move on down the tree to Seeing Red. Activating an action skill immediately activates all of Zane's kill skills. And with the ability to have two different action skills at any given time, you can already kind of see where this build would go. We could have a super kill-centric build. On to another one, Violent Violence. After killing an enemy, we gain increased fire rate for a few seconds. And then Playing Dirty, another kill skill. After killing an enemy, our next 5 shots have an additional chance for a free projectile. And keeping up with the theme of kill skills, which is obviously core to this tree, we next have Good Misfortune. Killing an enemy increases our action skill duration. Of course, we do have some diminishing returns with this ability, but still, keeping out our abilities that much longer is going to be really nice in this playstyle. And then our final ability, Death Follows Close. All of our kill stills gain an additional effect and duration, 40% additional bonus and 4 seconds on duration. So definitely a very solid run and gun and kill style oriented build. Now before we jump straight into augments, I want to discuss how they've changed with Zane, because with Amara, we were able to pick up an element, we're able to change the skill itself, and we're able to augment it. With Zane, instead, you just pick 2 separate augments that you want to choose from for each of your abilities that you're using. And our first up is going to be Winter's Drone. This is going to convert all of the Sentinel's damage into cryo damage, so keeping up with keeping stuff frozen. This obviously will work well with our kill skills. If stuff can't move, it's easy to shoot it on down. We have Bad Dose, where our Sentinel will occasionally shoot out a beam of radiation that will weaken enemies and buff Zane. For every weakened enemy, we get a buff. 3% fire rate per enemy, 6% movement speed per enemy, and then of course we have the damage and duration of that. Boomsday, which will add a rocket pod onto our Sentinel, allowing it to shoot rockets in addition to its machine guns. Static Field, where it's going to emit an electric field that will shock nearby enemies, draining their shields and replenishing Zane's. And then last but not least, Almighty Ordnance. We can hold down the button while the Sentinel is out and have it fire off a missile barrage. If an enemy is killed, the duration gets reset, and we can use this ability once per action skill usage. So kind of a nice, carpet bombing style move with our action skill. Moving on from the drone though, let's talk about the more defensive oriented abilities, and the first one we're going to be taking a look at here is Barrier. So the barrier is pretty straightforward. You put down the barrier, it's going to block bullets, and as we shoot through it, our guns deal 20% increased damage. So kind of similar to the shield we had on Axton, except we have a damage buff also caked on into it. Moving on into our first upgrade, we have Hardy Stock, pretty straightforward, max shield capacity. Onto Adrenaline, we gain increased action skill cooldown rate, and this bonus is based on the amount of shields we have. So the higher our shields, the higher our cooldown rate. Ready for action, some more synergy there, giving us improved shield recharge rate and reducing the shield recharge delay. Onto Stiff Upper Lip, whenever we're damaged, we gain damage resistance against that type. Rise to the occasion, we get health regeneration. The lower our shield is, the higher the bonus. And moving on from there, we have Brain Freeze. Whenever we score a critical hit, there's a chance the enemy will be slowed. On to the next skill, though, we have Confident Competence, where we're going to get increased gun damage and accuracy on a bonus based on how full our shields are. So up to 10% gun damage and 22% accuracy. Best Served Cold, another kill skill, where anytime we kill an enemy, we get a Cryo Nova with a short internal cooldown. And then we have two defensive options. Really Expensive Jacket, where elemental effects have their duration reduced against us by 50%, or alternatively, you can get Futility Belt, where we gain resistance to non-elemental damage, and then a kill skill where all elemental damage we take gets converted to non-elemental. Moving on down, though, this is where things really get spicy. Calm, Cool, and Collected. Whenever we freeze an enemy, our shield begins to recharge. If our shields are already full, we regenerate health for a few seconds, and if our health is already full, our action skill cooldowns and durations are immediately reset. Definitely a crazy ability, especially when you consider synergy with stuff like having cryo rounds on the Sentinel. Moving on, though, Refreshment. Whenever we damage a frozen enemy, we gain back some of that damage as health. And then moving on over, Nerves of Steel, we gain increased accuracy and handling. The longer our shield is full, the greater the bonus, going up to 99 stacks. And last but not least, Distributed Denial, where our barrier gains the effect of our currently equipped shield mod, which, as you can imagine, this probably is bonkers when we have legendary shield mods. Moving on into the augments, though, Charged Relay. Whenever Zane or an ally touches the barrier, they get increased movement speed and fire rate for a few seconds, 8 seconds after moving away from the barrier. Nanities or some shite. Zane and his allies get increased health regeneration, reload speed, and greatly improved shield recharge delay while near the barrier. The lower the health, the more health is regenerated. Another solid defensive augment there. Redistribution. Zane and his allies near the barrier gain increased gun damage for a few seconds after the barrier takes damage, just a 9% boost to our gun damage for 3 seconds. And then Deterrence Field. Enemies that touch the barrier take shock damage and are staggered. And lastly, All-Rounder. Our barrier becomes a dome covering all sides, but with a 20% increase to the cooldown of it. Moving on into the Digiclone tree. Digiclone's pretty straightforward. You drop it on down. As I mentioned, you can hold the button to swap places with it at any time. So while it is a defensive option, it's also offensive in the sense that you're putting yourself behind the enemy for damage. But going into the upgrades, Zane and his Digiclone gain increased magazine size, going up to 12%. Moving on from Prometheus, we have Synchronicity. Whenever one or more of our action skills are active, we get increased gun damage for each active skill, plus 2% for each activation. Borrowed Time, we gain increased action skill duration for every active skill. Down to Duct Tape mod, the first shot fired from Zane's gun has a chance to also fire a grenade. The more grenades in his capacity, the higher the chance. Obvious synergy since we're sacrificing our grenades. Fractal Frags, the Digiclone throws a copy of Zane's current grenade mod when it is first activated, and if the clone's killed, it drops a free grenade. Additionally, another kill skill here, where killing an enemy while the clone is active gives the clone a chance to throw that grenade at a 30% chance. Really maximizing our chances of grenades even though we're sacrificing them. Anyway, on to Donnybroke, another kill skill where when we kill an enemy, our Digiclone gets increased gun damage and health regeneration. Quick Breather, whenever we swap place, our shields immediately begin recharging. Very solid defensive utility there. Old U, press the button during Fight for Your Life and your clone is destroyed, and you immediately get a second one with full health, a nice cheat death ability there. And our next ability will seem a little bit weird since we're not using our grenades, but you'll see the synergy in just a second here. But basically we regenerate grenades as a kill skill. Moving on from that, Supersonic Man, whenever one or more of our action skills are active, we gain a movement speed bonus, obvious synergy with the gun damage bonus over in the Sentry Tree. And then moving on down, we have Trick of Light. Bonus shock damage to any enemies not targeting us, obvious synergy with our Digiclone. And this is where our pocket full of grenades synergy comes in. Boom Enhance. Whenever we summon our Digiclone, it consumes 3 grenades, and for each grenade consumed, it gets increased gun damage, max health, fire rate, and reload speed. Like a ghost, both Zane and the Digiclone have a chance to ignore bullets. This effect also stacks on up. And then last, but definitely not least, the coup d'etat of the tree, Double Barrel. The clone is equipped with a copy of Zane's current weapon when activated, and swapping places with the clone causes Zane and his clone to gain increased gun damage. Jumping on into the augments, though, I captured some stuff from the gameplay footage here, but our first one is going to be binary system. Whenever we swap place with our clone, a cryonova is going to be triggered both around ourselves and the clone, not only doing some damage, but also potentially freezing up enemies. We have a defensive option with Schadenfreude, where whenever a clone takes damage, our shields will be restored by a portion of that damage being taken. Next, we have Which One's Real, taking heavy advantage of the Trick of Light ability, where our clone is going to taunt enemies, basically makes them more likely to target the clone as opposed to us, really amplifying on that bonus electric damage we can do while not being targeted. Doppelganger, where holding down the button will end the action skill early and cause our clone to do a fiery explosion, damaging all nearby enemies. And then, of course, the more action skill time remaining, the greater the damage, so you can essentially detonate this thing as a nuke. And our final ability, Digital Distribution, where if we take health damage while the clone is active, a portion of that damage is shared with the clone instead. So definitely a lot of flexibility in Zane's playstyle, and especially between having both 2 action skills and then 2 potential augments for each of those skills. I think he's easily going to be one of the most diverse characters we see when it comes to different player builds. I did have a chance to play with both, the Sentinel Barrier and then the Sentinel the Clone. I always included the Sentinel because I felt like that was the clear offensive option, whereas while both the Barrier and the Clone do have some offensive utility, they're mostly defensive-oriented skills. Between those two combinations, though, personally, I think as an endgame build that a Sentinel and Clone style Zane would be absolutely crazy. In particular, if you look at all the skills based around grenade synergy, and even though we're not using our grenades, having the clone drop the grenades, having the sentinel drop the grenades, you add in something where you get like a legendary gun that has some kind of grenade amplification, and it's just going to be going completely off the charts. But at the same time, looking at some of the barrier skills, the one that I'm most interested in was the final tier, where your barrier gains the effect of your legendary shield. And what I think is so crazy about that is if you think about certain legendary shields, the biggest one that comes to mind here is the B. If it's something like your barrier gains the B effect, and then anybody that's shooting through your barrier gains that damage amplification, that could obviously lead to some absolutely insane team play results. Whether or not it actually functions like that, we're not going to see until we obviously get late game gameplay with Zane. But in theory, at least, there's some pretty freaking bonkers combinations. Despite that, of course, looking at the version of Zane where, your final clone skill, he just gets a copy of your gun, and legendary guns are pretty straightforward. They usually have some kind of crazy effect to them. And if you think about something like having 2 Norfleets, we saw what Salvador was capable of doing with 2 Norfleets in Borderlands 2. So there's obviously going to be some just absolutely out-of-this-world combinations that Zane is able to take advantage of. Comparing Zane to Amara, honestly, they both have just such craziness going on. Like, Zane, I think, is going to have a crazier potential in terms of item synergy when you consider, like, copying your shield, copying a legendary weapon, being able to have the multitude of grenades. But in terms of just a pure build around your skills, I think Amara looks a lot more interesting. And then on top of that, we still have 2 Vault Hunters that we don't even know what they have in store for us. So without question, I'm doing, just tons of playthroughs of this game. I can't wait. More than anything, I want the full game in my hands right now. I want to, sneak into 2K and get a copy and just play it for like the next 4 weeks, just living in a cave and doing nothing but playing it. But until that day comes, this is going to wrap things up for now. So I do have one more video that's going to be in the works. Going to be basically doing like a podcast type thing with a couple other guys that were at the event. We're just going to be, talking about our thoughts and our impressions and whatnot. So keep an eye out for that. Also, as I mentioned, once we get access to a skill tree builder online, I'll be making videos for both Zane and Amara, actually for all the Vault Hunters, once we've had a chance to look in depth into their moves and coming up with kind of some precursor builds that you could follow for when the game launches. But until that time, make sure to stay tuned, and I'll catch you guys next time with more Borderlands 3. Keep that fucking hype train going, baby, because this is definitely looking like it's going to be one, if not the best game of 2019.